Okay. Now, the last thing we were talking about was the fact that it's kind of a paradox that every creature on the planet is imbued with a survival instinct. You know, a survival and to reproduce and care for their offspring, except maybe alligators. And the paradoxical inevitability of death. And the inevitability of death is really kind of an interesting thing because, you know, you need louder. Can we jack these things up a little bit? Thank you. Can we make louder? Because our society doesn't really talk about death in that, you know, we don't tell ourselves through our media or any other way that the main thing that's going to happen to you in your life is that you are going to die. You are here, but you know, you're just here as a passenger. You're going to die. So it's a real paradox, and as Schiller points out, there is no reason for our organism to not be immortal. I mean, just a little design change here and there, and it would be entirely possible. And the thing is that we don't know for sure whether that isn't in our DNA already, because we're going to get to the DNA part here in a minute. So, hang on. Okay, so we've got here the survival instinct versus the inevitability of death. And then you notice another thing about the life system, which is one of the design features is reproduction, and no two organisms are identical. Now, this is a result of sexual reproduction, not asexual reproduction, or, you know, say, mitosis. In the early days of the Earth, when life originally began to proliferate on the planet, all reproduction was basically by cellular mitosis. You know, the cell split in every daughter organism was identical to the mother organism, except maybe at some point if one of them had a chance random mutation, then it passed it on to each of its, you know, two daughter organisms. But the unique thing about sexual reproduction is that when two organisms come together and they produce an offspring, the interesting thing that happens at the moment that the DNA is getting ready to combine and form, you know, a complete set for the child or the offspring, is that it unzips and it comes apart. It like comes apart into pieces, and it reassembles itself in a new order. And then it matches up with the other parent, and then you have a completely, totally unique individual. The only individuals on Earth that are exactly alike are identical twins. So that's a design feature, sexual reproduction. Now, is this a design feature that was already in the DNA of the asexually producing individuals? You know, the early single-cell organisms? Was it something that was just there waiting to turn on, say, for example, when there was enough oxygen in the atmosphere? I mean, was oxygen in the atmosphere a precondition for that particular DNA segment to kick in and say, okay, now we're going to start reproducing sexually, which then, you know, created the vast explosion of different types of species? That's an interesting question. But anyhow, the design features. So what you can conclude from that is that it seems important to the living system to have a large population of diverse organisms, which can serve to create a large enough surviving and varied genetic pool that will occasionally produce novel and important species survival attributes, which will cover as much diverse biosphere geography as possible, so that at least some living system organisms and their offspring will survive both long-term steady state, slowly changing biosphere conditions, and short-term, and possibly localized catastrophic events that regularly wreak havoc on the planet. Remember the ad for renting the planet? You know, we've got this planet, it's really a crappy place, you know, it changes a lot, and guess what? It gets hit by comets fairly frequently, it has earthquakes, you know, it does weird things, there's floods, famine, plague, you know, climatic changes. You know, a living system that's going to rent this rock really has to have some things on the ball. So this is what we're seeing in the design system of the living system, okay? So, why is the system designed as it is? The obvious answer seems to be the one thing that all members of the living system have in common: the DNA library, which propagates life itself and more. Because it's obvious that the living system, and we saw this when we were looking at the graphs of all the different species that have come and gone, and how they've proliferated all over the planet like mold on a cheese, that the obvious intent of the living system, of which we are just a very small part, is to survive over enormous periods of time, billions and billions of years. Now, and again, why? To preserve the DNA. Is it a prime function of the life system to gain in complexity over time so that an intelligent organism such as Homo sapiens and others evolve? Because this is what a lot of people assume, that it was all just there just to evolve us, because we're the greatest things since sliced bread and flush toilets, right? Or is the prime function to survive through time, and humans are dispensable? So it seems that the goal of evolution, per se, is to buy time, billions of years of it, allowing the living system to carry out its design intent. Evolution is nothing more than a means to an end, one of the mechanisms responsible for the adaptive capability of the system. Now, let's talk about species attributes versus biosphere attributes. A species attribute is anything that a group of individuals have in common that enables them to survive in a particular niche on the planet. For example, heat or cold tolerance. If you're in an environment and you have a range of temperatures that your organism can survive, if it gets hotter or colder, you're not going to survive. But if you are just exactly adapted to that particular range of temperatures, that is your species attribute, that I am able to tolerate these temperatures, and that's me. Okay, the biosphere attributes are what's in the biosphere. Okay, this particular environment gets this hot and this cold. And the objective of evolution is to ensure that the species attributes match the biosphere attributes. That is, that if you are in an environment that has a range of temperatures, that you will survive in that environment. If that environment changes, then you've got a problem. Except evolution has allowed for that. This is a graph of the heights of 10-year-old boys in a particular community. And what you will notice about this is that it forms a bell curve. Some of these little boys are pretty short, some of them are pretty tall, but most of them, the vast majority of them, like right in here, okay? Now, you can take a bell curve of species attributes. Because of sexual reproduction, everybody's got some changes in them. They've got some different tolerances, like a husband who's married to a wife who can't stand cold, and he wants everything, he can tolerate the cold, he throws the covers on. So they're different in their heat tolerances. I mean, maybe not to the point of dying if it changes, but they're definitely different, and that's a small range of difference there. So here in this particular example, you've got, go back, I'm not supposed to do that. You've got what is called this SA8, so that's species attribute 8. We've got a population of organisms that are living in a pond. And one of their attributes is that they have to have a certain salinity of the pond or a certain pH value. And you number each one of these attributes of the requirements of this species, of this one-celled organism, and you number them. So in this particular case, cold tolerance, the species attribute 8. This is their temperature tolerance. Okay, so most of the population fall into this bell curve. They can tolerate the temperature. So this is a percentage of the population. So the highest percentage of the population can tolerate a temperature in the mean range of the possible temperatures for this environment. So you have a margin of safety here, which means that the temperature never gets colder than this. Okay, so what happens if all of a sudden through climatic change it starts getting really cold? You know, what do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen is, well, we didn't have that one. I don't have the other graph. What happens is, if it gets cold, all the creatures that are, say this line moves here. Say this line moves over, the temperature moves over. Because this line represents the highest temperature, and this is the lowest temperature. So say the highest temperature moves over to here, and the lowest temperature moves over to here. What you have here is going to be a kill zone. All these people are going to die. One-celled organisms, whatever they are. They're all going to die. But then what's going to happen is all the ones that live, that continue to live, are going to reproduce, and they're going to pass on the genes of being in this range of being able to survive that particular temperature. The ones who didn't survive are going to die. So the point of this is that we don't evolve in response to changes in our environment, but rather that the living system has a plan. It has already within any population those who will survive a change. So everybody really got that? It's not that something happens. It's not that the outside is forcing evolution. It's that because of sexual reproduction, evolution is prepared for these events that happen on our planet. It's prepared to get cold. It's even prepared because it has spread species all around the planet. It's prepared for anything that comes for the express purpose of survival, the survival of the living system. Now, come on, machine, work. Okay, now, let's look at the laws of thermodynamics versus the living system. There are two laws of thermodynamics, fundamental. First one is that the energy of the universe is constant. And basically, this is kind of a closed system interpretation. And it also says the entropy of the universe tends to a maximum. Entropy means everything just kind of like moving to its state of equilibrium, and when it's in a state of equilibrium, that means there's no action, there's nothing going on. In other words, it just kind of tends to decline into rest, you know, like you have a swinging pendulum. Entropy makes it swing slower and slower and slower, so pretty soon it stops, and then it's not doing anything else. So that's a good way to think of entropy. So these laws are involved in the production and spending of energy in the living system, as well as every other phenomenon in the universe. This first law tells us that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. But the question is asked whether the first law was violated when our universe first came into existence via the Big Bang. Because if our universe came into existence, and energy can either be created or destroyed, how did that happen? The case can be made that the universe was never created, but it actually predates time as pure energy information. It is thus not defined in terms of time. The first law of thermodynamics shows that energy transfers across system boundaries are classified as either work or heat transfers. And the energy of the system itself may change in any process that goes from one state to another. The direction of flow is the concern of the second law of thermodynamics, which states that every process that a thermodynamic system may undergo can go in one direction only, and that the opposite process, in which both the system and its surroundings would be returned to their original state, is impossible. So formidable an influence is the second law that it should come as no surprise that it is a formidable challenge to any origin of life theory. The system is an equilibrium state, that is one that undergoes no further detectable change. If a system is not in an equilibrium state, a spontaneous change is not merely possible, it is inevitable and irreversible. However, the living system is one that is not in an equilibrium state. What logically follows is that living systems have the capacity to maintain all of their subsystems in a state of disequilibrium. So basically, being alive, being part of the living system, life itself, in a sense, is a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. At the microscopic level, each individual reaction functions according to the classic interpretation of the second law, no different from non-living systems. And in fact, it's because of the nature of chemistry and the nature of the elements of our universe that cellular processes actually can take place. For example, the assembling of a protein. When a protein is assembled by a ribosome, it assembles all the little pieces in a long polypeptide chain, and then it releases it into the aqueous fluid of the cell. It is the second law of thermodynamics that causes it to make a protein, because what happens is all the different atoms in this polypeptide chain are seeking equilibrium, and they begin to connect to the natural other atoms that create the bonds that cause it to fold into its characteristic shape that makes it a protein. So at a certain level, these laws operate within a living system. But there's other things about this cellular activity that is definitely not in line with the law of thermodynamics. So in the end, applied intelligence, that is information, is the only factor that can predictably defy the laws of probability, and is obviously the only factor that can defy the information component of the entropy provision of the second law of thermodynamics. Thus, intelligently applied energy introduced into any system is able to overcome randomness and to control the outcome of events. Because, of course, the second law of thermodynamics deals with these little atoms that are floating around in the primordial soup that are supposed to hook up with each other and create life. Well, it just doesn't work that way, because if they're all seeking to find some sort of equilibrium state, they're not going to connect up and become more and more complex without an input of intelligent energy. Okay. Okay, what are the problems? Okay, so you take a box of coins. And you take this box and you shake it up and you shake it up and you shake it up. You want them all to be, heads. It's never going to happen unless, it could happen. Say you've got 25 coins. But how many millions of times are you going to have to shake that box to make all of them come up heads? Do you have any idea?
Not enough.
Huh?
Not enough for the life of the universe.
Yeah, the universe, it just isn't going to happen. However, if you reach into that box and with your hand you turn them all over, you can very quickly create a situation where there's complete order in that box. came to light in the first place was in connection with the efficiencies of steam engines that had nothing at all to do with innate understanding of entropy of complexity. And yet somehow this little second law of thermodynamics, which was devised to study machines, was applied to living systems. And of course, you know, they want all human beings to be machines. They don't want them to be living systems. They don't want them to have consciousness. So, the confusion is simply because the second law comprises a two-part imperative, tying together two very distinct concepts, energy losses and disorder, within the concept of energy. The first part involves bookkeeping of energy, similar in sense to the first law, energy is neither created nor destroyed. While the second law relationship of energy loss and disorder may always hold in the natural, non-living world, it is definitely not the case in the living system phenomenon. This can be explained in only one of two ways. Either the linkage between energy and disorder is not as absolute as our traditional interpretation implies, or living systems violate a major provision of that law. The only logical solution is to allow a decoupling of the energy and information components of entropy to allow them to be independent entities, because in fact they are. If a system is natural and inanimate, that is non-living, it will naturally tend toward disorder over time. It will decay. If the system is a living system, it will, by definition, tend toward increased order over time. The fundamental difference must be directly linked to some faculty that maintains the continuous intelligent supervision, controlling all of the dynamic activities in the living cell, and the cessation of which signifies death and decay. The only reason, as I said, the principle of the second law came to light was because of machines. Now, we have a problem because somebody messed up all of my notes here. Yeah. Anyhow, we'll see what's coming up next, and then we'll know where we are. Oh yeah, here we are. Okay, since human intelligence is a direct result of the increasing complexity phenomenon and characteristics throughout the living system, the creation and operation of machines by humans is merely an extension of that very same living system phenomenon. So we come back once again to the idea that somewhere, somehow, something made living machines on our planet and imbued in them the ability to evolve and grow and to create, you know, human beings. But we can't let that take us away because, as we've seen, you know, species can come and go, and we are probably no exception. And there's a possibility we are, but I don't think we need to bank on that. We are reminded that this state of increasing complexity, characteristic of biological systems, is contrary to every known non-living phenomenon. The moment that we neglect to keep up the intelligent control that maintains order within the subsystems of our mechanical machines, they will spontaneously head in the direction of equilibrium and eventually cease to function. If you don't put gas in your car, if you don't keep it maintained, it's going to go in the junkyard. So intelligence exists at the species level within the system's sophisticated use of distribution statistics that permits species to anticipate biosphere changes, adapt accordingly, and thus be able to control somewhat evolutionary destiny. We also find many examples at the living system level within the system-wide feedback, checks, and balances that characterize interactions across all species. And that is, you know, different species. Like if you have a bunch of rabbits, population of rabbits, and they get to be too many, then you have a handy population of foxes that's going to go and eat a bunch of them. We should really think about that seriously in consideration of the fact that human beings now number 7 billion on this planet. And it really is more than the planet can support. So life is any system where the information and energy components of entropy are decoupled such that the former component can decrease while the latter always increases. We need to depersonalize intelligence from its egocentric roots and expand its meaning and application to include some fundamental characteristics of the universe in general. Neither intelligence nor information can be derived from random events because, according to the laws of thermodynamics, neither exists in a non-living environment. And there is no practical point in deferring the origin of intelligence to the natural laws of nature, because they are ruled by the second law and the spontaneous tendency towards equilibrium state and greater randomness. It becomes obvious that if the source of such intelligence could not derive from the fledgling biosphere itself, that is, from within the random state of its chemical constituents, then it had to have been imposed from outside. So if the living system is designed to last for billions of years, and the purpose is to maintain a library of information stored in the DNA, who is it for? If we are just one of infinite numbers of species that have lived in the past 3.8 billion years on this planet, we just happen to be what, as far as we know, is most complex. And if we can tell from a design analysis of the system that it's intended to last for billions of years, and if we can tell from the design analysis that what it's intended to conserve is DNA, because that is the one thing that all species share in common, then who is it for? So now we need to take a little short divergence. We ask the question, who is it for? So hold that in your minds. Okay. Now, I like this little quote because this is Erwin Schrödinger, and we already quoted him in the other part when he was talking about negative entropy and positive entropy. It's from the same book, actually. And he says the most interesting thing: it's impossible for a single mind fully to command more than a small specialized portion of it. I can see no escape from this dilemma than that some of us should venture to embark on a synthesis of facts and theories at the risk of making fools of ourselves. And some of us do. So, matter and energy comprise the surface structure of the universe. The surface structure is readily perceived by our senses. The internal structure is more subtle. It consists not only of matter and energy, but of information as well. And that's Tom Stonier, Information in the Internal Structure of the Universe, and he died, what, not too long ago? So the first thing I want to talk about is our perceptions, our familial social programming, our historical experiences, and why it is that we sometimes have trouble perceiving things as they are. Take a squirrel, for example. A squirrel, he knows for some instinctive reason that he must collect acorns and bury them for the winter. When a fellow squirrel dies, you know, he thinks nothing of it. He doesn't make up stories about acorns being gifts from God, or being brought by aliens, or being bombs that could explode and cause him to lose his life. You know, he has no life that makes him think about these things in any way other than a totally practical, pragmatic. When a friend squirrel dies, he's gone. When the acorn appears, it's there, he knows what to do with it. You know, when he gets hungry, he eats. Human beings seem to be the only ones who make up completely irrational stories about phenomena in our universe that bear absolutely no relationship to what is real and on the ground. You could say that we all have an internal mental map, a map of the universe. We have a map of our world. And the question is, how close is our mental map to what is actually real? I mean, how many people have phobias? You have agoraphobia, claustrophobia, you have any number of phobias. And, you know, a phobia is just an exaggeration of this tendency. You know, you go out into an open space and you feel like, you know, something terrible is going to happen to you if you're not protected inside your house. How rational is that? Well, to somebody who doesn't have it, you know, it's obviously, clearly, totally irrational. If you have claustrophobia, you get in an elevator and all of a sudden you can't breathe, you know, you start having an asthma attack. Well, somebody who is bothered by that can look at the person who's having a claustrophobic attack and say, that person is nuts. You know? You're being totally irrational. Nothing's going to happen to you. This is an elevator, for God's sake. You push the button, it takes you to the next floor, and you get out. You know, it's only a few seconds. Can't you control yourself? But to the person who is suffering from it, it is such a big illusion, it's such a big thing, that they can't master it. They can't control it. Their free will detector is really gone on blame. So, but the thing is that most of what we think about our world is part of a program. It's part of what we've been inculcated to believe. Because human beings seem to, because of their neoplasticity, the fact that everything isn't hardwired into them, there's something else exists in them that helps them to form social groups. And social groups apparently were necessary for survival in Paleolithic times. People had to get along and support one another, or they died. So there's this neoplasticity that allows a group to form its own kind of rules, and then they get, you know, put onto all the children. They all grow up, they know how everybody behaves in the society and the culture. You know, what is expected of them, how to behave, you know, what is polite, what is not polite, what is beyond the pale. And they all, you know, conform to it. And if you look around the world, you see there's all different kinds of cultures everywhere. For example, you know, France has a very specific kind of culture. Spain has a different kind of, American culture is different. I mean, we've been doing a lot of talking recently about the differences between American culture and French culture. You know, the French don't value truth. They value being able to argue intellectually very well. It doesn't matter whether they arrive at truth. It just matters, you know, what matters is that they do it extremely well, that they're rational and their logical points are masterful, that they have the best quotes from the best sources, you know. And in the U.S., it's a little bit different, you know. Even though they have been taken over by the same disease since 9/11, it still used to be that in the U.S., truth had a very high value. And I think that's probably from the Protestant ethic, while France is still pretty much controlled by the Catholic Church, whether it's a secular or not, but still. So you can take a child. Say, you can take a child from a very primitive culture, say, maybe in the darkest jungles of the Amazon, and you could bring him into, I mean, if he's an infant, you could bring him and you could raise him in a modern Western culture, and he would learn and adapt and be just exactly like, you know, any modern Western kid. And by the same token, you could take one of, you know, a Western couple's baby, you know, give it to this primitive child, and it would grow up to be just as savage as the other children in that savage tribe. You can take, you know, this is something that was done during World War II, that there were a lot of Jewish children who were taken and raised in non-Jewish households. And they became completely non-Jewish, you know, in terms of their ethnicity or their religious practice or their, you know, their different customs and so forth. So the point is that the way a person is not the way they have to be, that it's enculturated. We believe what we believe, we think what we think, we behave the way we behave because it's programmed into us. And this goes to more than just, you know, cultural levels. You know, what we believe is a lie. You know, what we believe is truth. These are things that are not necessarily natural to us. So the point is that our perceptions are programmed, And one of the main programs that has been put onto most of humanity for the last 50 years is the material nature of our world. That is matter rules. There's a whole lot of things that are being done, propagandized. Food, drink, social ideas, sexuality, all that sort of thing. It's all being changed. So that's our perceptions. Now, the question is, can information exist outside the human brain? If a tree falls and no one's there to hear it, does it produce a sound? How many people think that if it falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, it still produces a sound anyway? Raise your hand. Okay, how many people believe that if there's nobody there to hear it, it doesn't? So we're really about equally divided. Some people think that if there's nobody there to hear it, it doesn't produce a sound, and other people, okay, well, how about if it depends on how you define sound?
I voted for both.
You voted for both. Schrödinger's sound? Well, the thing is there can actually be two correct answers depending upon how you define sound. If you define sound as needing to impinge upon the eardrum of a witness, then clearly when a tree falls and there's no eardrum there to receive that sound, then there is no sound. However, if you define sound as movement of waves through the air, whether or not it impinges on anybody's eardrum, then yes, it does make a sound. The thing is the first answer is egocentric and relativistic. Because such an answer will get in the way of an objective analysis of reality. If everything is all about you, how will you ever understand how the universe sees itself? If you were not here and only the universe were listening, would that tree make a sound? Okay. Basically, it would be like saying that if we leave the lights on in a room, as soon as we leave the room, even having left the lights on, the light no longer exists. Or as soon as we turn off the radio or the TV, the room is no longer filled with radio or TV wave transmissions. Our civilization has created whole institutions to store information outside of our brains. Libraries, art galleries, museums, radio waves, computer disks, books. It was not until the invention of timekeeping devices that time was uncoupled from life events. It wasn't until the invention of devices that do work that energy was uncoupled from things. Galileo began to study cannonballs so as to analyze force and motion. Before that time, matter and energy were not separate. In the Aristotelian worldview, the fact that you could heat metal meant simply you were adding more of one of the elements, earth, air, fire, water. So you added more fire to the metal, and that changed the metal fundamentally. So it wasn't that the metal got hot. It was that it was fundamentally changed by the addition of fire. We are presently facing the necessity to uncouple information from our brains where it generally resides in very subjective formats. Scientists are exploring natural properties of information, including its structure, dynamic behavior, and statistical features. Who would have ever thought that information has structure and dynamical features? Information is more than something we manipulate inside our heads. Electronic devices transmit information in physical form. DNA carries the information that instructs a single cell to become a lion or a mouse. That is, DNA is a physical substance that carries information and has been doing so for several billion years to our knowledge. And that is information that existed long before our brains came into being. Can information be processed outside the human brain? At the most primitive level, we can put into a computer two numbers, 5 and 7, and instruct the computer to add them and get back to number 12. The 12 was not entered in by the human operator, so the computer processed that information and gave you something that you didn't put into it. This is very different from things that just store information, such as books, videos, paintings. And certainly information is processed at the cellular level, as in the activity of the ribosomes in constructing polypeptide chains. I wonder what we've got going on here. There are different forms of energy: mechanical, chemical, electrical, heat, sound, light, nuclear. In the same way, there are different forms of information. Human information is only one form. When a radio transmitter emitting radio waves carrying human information also imposes patterns of information such as frequency and modulation on the raw energy. Computers impose their own logic patterns on information, 0 and 1, yes and no. The raw energy that is informed by the radio transmitter is electrical and might come from steam energy that imposes patterns of information on heat to cause it to produce electricity. At each step, the energy becomes more organized and is processed by human-created information machines. That is, under certain circumstances, machines can convert energy into information and vice versa. The same can be said for printing presses and computers, electronic signal generators, clocks, spinning wheels, looms, and more. That is to say that even when it's not doing anything, a machine stores information. An automobile is a storehouse of information. And a living system is a storehouse of information. A good engineer who's never seen an automobile before can look at one and figure out what it does, what the different parts are, and how it works and everything about it, because it has that information inherent in its form and structure. Same is true of the living system. Information, therefore, seems to be a property of the universe. It is part of its internal structure. The term information includes data, knowledge, insight, wisdom. There is a spectrum. The datum is a small chunk of information. The low end of the spectrum, moving to facts, organized to knowledge, and further organized to wisdom. All of these represent increasing levels of complexity. Knowledge, insight, wisdom represents the increasing complexity of organized information in people's heads. We define human information as that which is perceived or transmitted without making a judgment as to its accuracy or reliability. That is, information has an independent reality. Meaning does not. This is where we come back to our perception. Because you get raw information from the universe. Pretend you're a squirrel. There's an acorn. It's an acorn. It's not an alien. It's not a bomb. It's not anything other than an acorn, something to eat. Your squirrel buddy dies. He's gone. And he hasn't gone to some, happy squirrel hunting ground. You don't have to imagine that there's more to it, more to the event than what is there. I mean, that's just pure raw data. And I'm not saying that what we do with information, that, asserting meaning or affirming meaning is the wrong thing to do. I'm just trying to point out that if you want to really work with something, you have to separate your own preconceptions from the data before you can even begin to manage it properly. Meaning is the interpretation of information in relation to some context. A radio picking up Morse code in a foreign language is detectable, but not necessarily comprehensible. A book written in a foreign language carries information, but may be incomprehensible to the reader. If a person who speaks English looks at a book written in French, he at least recognizes most of the letters. But if he looks at a book written in Arabic, the only thing he can know is that it's a book and that it contains information, but he recognizes nothing. So there is a lot of evidence for the fact that information exists don't even recognize yet, such as looking at the living system itself as something that can convey information to us. We must not confuse the detection and or interpretation of information with the information itself. Information is considered to be distinct from the system which interprets it. Information is. It does not need to be perceived to exist. It does not need to be understood to exist. It requires no intelligence to interpret it. It does not have to have meaning to exist. Information is. Items which convey no information of any interest at all to Dr. Watson were loaded with clues, for sure. Now, information and organization are intimately related. All organized structures contain information. No organized structure can exist without containing information. What did we just say about the automobile? Somebody who knows how to read it can read it and tell you a whole lot about it. It has information inherent in its organization. Therefore, the addition of information to a system manifests itself by causing a system to become more organized or reorganized. An organized system has the capacity to release or convey information to the person who figures out how to read it or extract it. Energy is defined as the capacity to perform work. Information is defined as the capacity to organize a system or to maintain it in an organized state. It is impossible to perform useful work without an input of both energy and information. But as noted, machines can convert energy into information and information into energy. This may be an important esoteric concept and deserves more investigation. So, we just did that. Communication systems, including passive band transmissions, are for the purpose of bridging the space between two or more receptors, intelligent beings. Example, source, man on the telephone. An encoder, the mouthpiece of the telephone. The message, the words the man speaks. The channel, the electrical wiring, now electrical impulses travels. A decoder, the earpiece of the receiving telephone. A receiver, the ear and mind of the listener. Now, we asked the question just a little while ago. Who is, or what is, the information contained in a living system, DNA library 4? Let's see if I can get back to where I was here. I don't know, the paper's messed up here. I think we're in big trouble now, people. Here we go. Alright. That's what you get for having 100 pages of notes. Now, we already mentioned Origins of Life, the fifth option, Brian Schiller. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Now, Brian Schiller has done some really interesting things talking about DNA, because among the things that he has done is he has done a systems engineering analysis about how DNA mutates and recombines. He can tell you exactly how many possible recombinations there are, because he's worked them all out. And he can show you what possible mutations occur in transcription errors, what possible mutations occur from external events. He can tell you many of the mechanisms because he's done a systems engineering analysis of it. For example, did you know that, well, I better tell you about the DNA before I even tell you that. Hang on. So you got here your standard, picture of DNA. And what you have in your cell nucleus is you have 23 pairs of chromosomes. And they kind of look like this. Okay? And then you take this, a piece of this. This is just a little bit of it, like this in this little place right there. And it stretches out into these little balls like this. And then each one of those little balls unravels into this, and you end up with this. Okay? So you have this ladder-like structure with these little ladder links on it. Okay? So those little bundles, okay, we've got chromosomes. Chromosomes are made of tightly wound DNA and protein. Genes are found along the length of the chromosomes. A gene is a segment of DNA that contains instructions for making a specific protein or proteins. There are 3 billion base pairs in the human genome. This is a base pair right here. These little rungs of the ladder. There's 3 billion of them. Each twist in the DNA coil takes 10 nucleotides and is about 3.4 nanometers long. The DNA strand is normally compacted, forming millions of tight coils around a core made of protein filaments called histones. See, that's what you're seeing here. See all those little things there. The histone surface has a path of positive charges. It is alpha. That precisely match the pattern of negative charges along the DNA double helix. Let's see if I got it. Yeah. It is thought that the histone scaffolding behaves somewhat like an accordion, relaxing and permitting the DNA coils to separate when a particular segment, a genetic instruction, needs to be copied and then bunching up again after the copying is complete. This right here is not a copying activity necessarily. This is, yeah, it is. Because what happens is the cell needs something. And these little cell machines go over and they, it's like having a tape collection, millions of tapes or CDs. And somehow this little machine that knows what piece of DNA is needed goes over to these 23 pairs of chromosomes, knows which one of the 23 to go to, knows how to emit the enzyme to inform it to relax, to open up and relax just a little segment of this, very long string of DNA so that it can make a copy. And then it makes a copy, like a photocopy, and takes it out of the nucleus of the cell, takes it to the ribosome, which then assembles the polypeptide protein that is needed. Now, we're talking about right there, just to do that, just to make a protein. We're talking about an intelligence that just staggers the mind. I mean, how is this going to happen in the primordial soup? Well, excuse me, hey, I got a plan for how we can do this, you look like a pretty nice amino acid. Let's get together and do this sort of thing. It's nuts. This is the percentages of your DNA that are used for various activities. Before the Human Genome Project, it was thought the Human Genetic Library must have something like 100,000 genes, each of which coded for a single protein or enzyme or instruction. We have now been informed that there are only about 30 to 35,000 genes in the Human Genetic Library, unless they change that, these change from week to week. However, if all the information contained within human DNA were written on paper, it would have about 1 billion words of 3 letters each, which is 5,000 volumes of 500 pages each. But the genetic content, the part that actually codes for protein, is only 8% of the total, and the other 92% is often referred to as junk. That means that only 400 of the 5,000 volumes in your theoretical library are devoted to instructions, and the remaining 4,600 volumes are about what? Exons is the term used to describe an expressed gene, or an expressed sequence. That is, genes that do stuff. Introns are called intervening sequences of stuff that doesn't do anything as far as anyone can tell. And as you can see, there's a bunch of it. Genetic information is encoded in the DNA molecules as a series of bases running up and down a ladder-like structure. The rungs are the base pairs. The base pairs serve a kind of genetic alphabet of 4 letters. The 4 letters of the DNA alphabet are themselves composed of 2 sets of complementary nucleic acids that are attached to each other via chemical bonding. The ends of the rung are attached to the ladder frame also via chemical bonding. When they say chemical bonding, what they really mean is that there is a chemical that has, some extra, atomic activities going on, where some electrons and protons, they kind of hook each other together. The important thing is that the actual information is coded in the base pairs that are strung along the ladder. So we have an alphabet of 4 letters. 4 chemical letters are A, T, G, and C, which stand for the names of the 4 nucleotide bases: adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. A pairs always and only with T. G pairs only with C. Thus, G and C can pair only as GC or CG. Similarly, T pairs only with A as TA or AT. This exclusive complementarity is at the heart of the copying of a genetic message from anywhere, as well as the replicating of the whole DNA library when the cell reproduces itself. When DNA replicates during cell division, the ladder-like structure unzips along its length. One side with its half of base pairs goes to each of the new cells being produced. This procedure permits each half to reconstruct its corresponding other half by gathering from within the cell the missing complementary components to make up the complete DNA molecule. In other words, it knows if it's split down the middle, it knows what it has to pair with, because there's only 2 possibilities. Transcription is when a gene is extracted from the DNA library and transferred to the translating machines of the cell, the ribosomes, to be read and interpreted, and the instructions followed to the letter. So we already talked about when the cell calls for a working copy of a gene, the mechanism search for and locate the gene wherever it is. Once the beginning and the end portion of the DNA contain the original. So anyhow, the important thing about this, I have little hand truck things called transfer RNA that deliver the individual amino acid building blocks. See, there's a little hand truck. It comes along and it brings the amino acids and it gives it to this, and this is reading the piece of DNA and it's constructing it. You see, it's adding these things to the string, and then it tosses out this, and another one comes along. And, do you really understand the amazing complexity of this process? And you think it's not informed by a tremendous amount of information? Just the systems analysis of this process tells you how much information is contained in there. So anyway, now we're getting to something really kind of fun and interesting. We've got peptide synthesis. Now, While pondering whether such a system could arise naturally, consider as well where the whole genetic coding system might have come from. These are two very separate entities: the intelligent machinery that carries out the instructions and the DNA that carries the instructions. Because DNA is just like a one-dimensional map. It's just like a book. It carries the information. It didn't write it. That's the important thing. Now, we use such one-dimensional maps all the time as in sequences of numbers written on a notepad that we dial into a telephone to connect us to one of a billion phones on the planet or more. The number tells us the precise sequence of numbers to push, which produces a series of tones, which activates the telephone company equipment, which connects us to the party we want to speak to. There is no intelligence in the numbers. The intelligence is in the way the system exchange interprets the pushing of a sequence of buttons. The system is set up to interpret the low-level information that the caller inputs to initiate the call. This is processed through a series of intelligent and sophisticated subsystems and ends in you being connected to the person you are calling. The sequences of symbols themselves, whether in the DNA or in a phone number, must be used in a specific and restrictive way to initiate a chain of events that result in specific results. Can additional information be incorporated into sequential information systems in order to expand their versatility? A phone number can be enhanced. A keypad can be used as a coding device with letters of the alphabet, including along with the numbers. Thus you can call ATT, or you can call anything. This additional level of information is designed into the phone system in order to engage the intelligence of another system of the human brain. It's easier to remember call ATT than 1155-188. Because the mind can associate both the reasons for the number together with a phrase that translates into the required dialing sequence. Of course, call ATT would be useless if you did not know how to read. The same information format that is utilized in the one-dimensional genetic mapping of protein amino acid sequence. A word composed of letter sequences is a linear map. And if you can't read, that is all it is, a series of symbols that convey nothing to you. We presently use the English alphabet to represent the amino acids that make up the polypeptide chains that fold into proteins. If we can use the alphabet to represent a genetic sequence, perhaps the genetic code alphabet could also include messages that could be understandable to us if only we knew how to read. Now, how's it done? Take the word. So these are the letters of the English alphabet that have been assigned to these various amino acids. Here you have, and this is interesting, but without getting too technical, you find that this particular amino acid can be written in 4 different ways. That means that mutations can occur to pieces of DNA that absolutely do nothing until another major connecting mutation takes place. So small mutations can occur and the same amino acids keep getting made because the system is designed to accommodate that. His design analysis of this system of coding proteins is really, really worth reading. And as you see that there are a couple of things that only have 2 or 3 sequences to code for them, and then there is stop. At the end of every codon, when it's time, when it's finished, there's a stop code. And that's the stop code right there. There's 3 versions of it. Take the word warning. You can write it with UGG, GC, blah, 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 blah. And then when you transfer it into, from the mRNA to the regular DNA language, you convert the U to the T. And this is the word morning written in DNA. The point being that those millions and billions of introns could be a code, which would give a reason to why the living system was designed to survive for billions of years. Now, let me just show you something. This is an article from Science News. So they've just been discovering that, some years ago. This is back in 1994. The non-coding regions of DNA contain language properties. Focus neglects 90% of the DNA in a cell. Long ignored and considered junk, this non-coding DNA nevertheless carries its own message. Language-like properties. One mistake in the code would be misread. No. This was from Scientific American. Investigators have found that junk parts of the genome of many organisms may be expressing a language. The vast majority of genetic material in organisms from bacteria to mammals consists of non-coding DNA segments which are interspersed with the coding parts. Some kind of organized information. Junk DNA follows the structure of language. There has to be some kind of hierarchical arrangement of the information to allow one to use it in an efficient fashion that has some adaptability and flexibility. Well, Schiller's analysis of it and how it could be preserved for billions of years, because it's important to know his analysis of how mutations occur in order to understand how it could be that something like that could survive literally for billions of years carried in the living system on this planet. Now, I want my other file back. I think I'm done with this one. Oh yes. This is what Brian Schiller said. Somewhat astonishing to discover an information system that can convey language in an alphabet just like we do and predates humans by billions of years and has only come to life in the last 50. Billions of years, people. Think about it.